Welcome in. It's really great to have you with us for this deep dive. Usually when we talk about something like, say, a medical diagnosis, there's an inherent expectation of precision.
Oh, absolutely, like engineering.
Right. Exactly like
Mhm.
engineering. You fall down, you break your arm, you go to the hospital, and the X-ray shows that stark, jagged white line right across the bone. The doctor points to the film and simply says, there it is. It's incredibly straightforward.
Yeah, it's entirely binary. I mean, the system is either functioning properly or there is a distinct, observable mechanical failure. There's no in between.
Exactly. Broken or not broken, it's clean. But, and this is what we're getting into today, then you zoom out, you look at modern physics, specifically the realms of orbital mechanics, the behavior of celestial bodies, quantum field theory, and suddenly it feels like that diagnostic X-ray machine is just fundamentally broken.
Yeah, we're looking at a landscape that is, honestly, it's incredibly murky right now.
It really is. I mean,
Yeah.
for over a century, the physics community has basically accepted chaos and unresolvable singularities as these fundamental limits of our equations.
Yeah.
We look at something like the infamous three-body problem, which is essentially the hallmark of deterministic chaos.
A problem that has frustrated physicists since literally Isaac Newton, by the way.
Right, since Newton. And we just, collectively shrug. We say, well, continuous equations simply can't solve it. The universe is inherently chaotic.
Which is a huge assumption to make.
It is. But I've been poring over this fascinating stack of theoretical physics, white papers, dense topological models, and research notes surrounding a completely new paradigm. And it asks a terrifyingly simple question for you to consider. What if the chaos isn't a mathematical failure at all?
Right. What if it's structural?
Exactly. What if the erratic behavior of three celestial bodies isn't a breakdown of our math, but a literal physical consequence of discrete fluid geometry? What if you, the listener, are looking at a universe that is fundamentally not a vacuum?
And that question, that changes everything. And it is the strict mission of our deep dive today, because we are taking you on a rigorous, highly technical intellectual journey into what is known as the substrate dynamic multi-Tor framework, or S-DMT for short.
S-DMT, right?
Yeah. Our objective here is to meticulously examine how orbital chaos, the origins of physical mass, and the fundamental constants of nature are perfectly resolved. Perfectly.
Which is a massive claim.
It is a massive claim, but to even begin this journey, we have to demand that you completely abandon the classical, deeply ingrained concept of a homogeneous, empty vacuum. Instead, we're diving into a universe modeled as a thixotropic superfluid hydrogen plenum.
Okay, let's unpack this right away, because we are heading into some really intense terrain today, and the stakes of this framework, they literally couldn't be higher. We're talking about a unified theory of everything.
We really are.
We're going to dissect what the S-DMT calls the 39 strata golden cross topology. We're going to detail the non-orientable Klein-Bottle membrane that seemingly constitutes our single reality.
Yeah, and we're going to connect fundamental physical constants, things physicists usually just measure in a lab and accept as fact, to pure, inescapable, deterministic geometry.
Right, and ultimately, we're going to synthesize the macro structure of the entire cosmos through what these white papers call the double vortex operator.
It requires a really profound paradigm shift. We are essentially translating the accepted illusions of the standard model into the geometric reality of S-DMT. Standard physics assumes space is a smooth, continuous, frictionless void, right? Where objects, planets, stars, particles, they just simply exist and move.
Like marbles on a smooth rubber sheet, which is the classic Einstein analogy.
Exactly. But S-DMT throws that completely out the window. Space is not a void. It is a highly structured physical material. That is the plenum.
Okay, I want to make sure we don't lose anyone in the heavy topological math right off the bat. So I want to propose a grounding analogy for you to hold on to as we go through these papers.
Oh, analogies are crucial here. Go for it.
I want you to imagine taking the smooth, continuous, perfectly elastic curves of Einstein's classical spacetime and forcing them through a highly rigid, microscopic, 3D printed mesh grid.
Okay, yeah.
The continuous fluid inherently wants to flow smoothly, right? But it has no choice but to navigate this discrete, quantified, rigid grid. The friction, the drag, let's call it the stutter that occurs between the continuous fluid and that rigid mesh, That is exactly where physical reality is born.
That is spot on.
Right. That microscopic stutter is mass. It is the arrow of time. It is gravity.
That analogy perfectly isolates the core tension of the entire S-DMT model. It's the negotiation between the continuous flow of the superfluid and the discrete, rigid boundaries of the geometric lattice it inhabits. And to truly understand the mechanics of this plenum, we have to start by examining its absolute foundation.
The geometry of the membrane itself.
Exactly. We have to look at the membrane.
Let's do it. And here is where the S-DMT completely flips our perspective of where we physically are in the universe. Because the framework states, quite emphatically in the papers, that the Earth is not a spherical planet floating inside the plenum. The Earth is the plenum.
Which is, it's a massive conceptual leap. It requires you to entirely abandon your spatial intuition. In classical terms, we think of Earth as this solid mass embedded within a vast, empty space-time container.
Like a marble in an empty swimming pool.
Right. But in S-DMT, the Earth is essentially a toroidal projection of a Mobius ribbon. It is a non-orientable Klein-Bottle membrane.
Okay, let's define that mechanically for the listener, because non-orientable manifold is a dense term. We've all seen a Mobius strip, right? You take a strip of paper, you give it a half twist, and tape the ends together.
Yeah, the classic magic trick.
Exactly. You suddenly have a shape with only one continuous surface and one edge. An ant walking along it would eventually walk on the inside and the outside without ever crossing an edge. A Klein bottle is basically the three-dimensional equivalent of that, right?
Yeah. Exactly right. It's a closed surface with absolutely no distinct inside or outside. If you were to travel far enough along the surface of a Klein bottle, you'd return to your starting point, but you would be mirror reversed.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. And in the S-DMT, this non-orientable membrane isn't just a smooth, featureless sheet. It is tiled. It's aggressively quantified by a highly specific, discrete lattice called the golden cross.
And this lattice is composed of precisely 39 to the third power nodes. That's $393,333.
Yes, 59,399 discrete nodes. It's a strict, finite quantization of reality.
But reading through the source material, it's the angular geometry of this golden cross lattice that completely blew my mind. The entire structure of space is strictly defined by 36 orthogonal segments of 10 degrees each, plus 3 diagonal transformations also of 10 degrees each.
Right.
Can we detail the physical meaning of these segments? Because they aren't just random mathematical slices. The authors are very clear on this.
No, they're not random at all. They are the absolute bedrock of why the universe operates the way it does. Let's look at the 36 orthogonal segments first. Each segment is 10 degrees. If you multiply 36 by 10, what do you get?
360 degrees, a full circle.
Exactly, a full geometric rotation. In the language of S-DMT, these 36 discrete segments represent the 36 angular quanta that constitute a complete rotation of the plenum's fluid. The white papers refer to these as the jitterbug microsteps.
The jitterbug. That's a term originally coined by the architect and systems theorist Buckminster Fuller, right?
Yes, good catch.
Yeah, he used it to describe a specific vector equilibrium, like how geometric shapes like a cube octahedron can continuously twist and transform into an octahedron or a tetrahedron.
Fuller's intuition was actually remarkably aligned with S-DMT. Here, the jitterbug steps represent the minimal chiral torsions of the fluid.
Chiral torsions, let's make sure that's clear.
Think of chiral torsion as a localized twisting movement that has a specific handedness, like a screw. The thixotropic superfluid cannot just swirl smoothly in infinite gradations. It's forced to move through the golden cross lattice in these discrete 10-degree ratcheting motions.
Like a gear clicking into place.
Exactly like a gear. And that accounts for the 36 orthogonal segments. But there is a massive catch here. If the universe only possessed those 36 orthogonal segments, you would have a flat, entirely orientable, perfectly symmetrical, and completely closed geometric space.
And as we know from classical thermodynamics, perfect symmetry and perfect closure equal absolute stasis.
Exactly. Nothing would happen.
Right. If everything is perfectly balanced, nothing moves. No energy flows, you wouldn't have a universe, you just have a frozen mathematical artifact sitting there.
Absolute stasis is the death of mechanics, and that is exactly why the 3 diagonal segments are the secret engine of the topology. These 3 segments are also 10 degrees each, but they act in skew directions. They actively break the perfect crystalline isotropy of the fluid.
So they're like the deliberate imperfections introduced into the system.
Well, it's more than an imperfection, it's a topological necessity. These 3 diagonal shifts create the essential non-orientable twist required for the Klein-Bottle membrane to physically exist.
I see.
Yeah, they represent the 3 torsional axes, the triple cross. that mathematically force the membrane to fold back through itself rather than just closing into a simple static sphere.
Okay, so let's do the math on this for a second. You have 36 orthogonal segments plus 3 diagonal skew segments. That equals 39 segments in total.
Right.
And 39 segments multiplied by the 10-degree elementary jitterbug step gives us a total angular measure of exactly 390 degrees. The elegance of that is almost aggressively beautiful. 39 isn't just an arbitrary count, it's the maximal fractal index of the Golden Cross. And 10 is the fundamental quantum unit of the jitterbug twist.
It's the physical, discrete realization of what the framework calls the fractal Laplacian order. The geometry isn't merely a descriptive map of where space is. The geometry is the physical action of the space itself.
But I have to push back on this, or at least ask for a major conceptual clarification for everyone listening, because this severely challenges the foundational way human beings perceive reality.
Well, for sure. It's a huge leap.
Right, because if the Earth is this non-orientable Klein-Bottle membrane structured by a 39 strata Golden Cross, how is the inside of this membrane actually the sky we observe above us? Classical physics, and honestly basic common sense, tells us we are standing on a spherical rock looking outward into an infinitely vast, mostly empty void.
Yeah.
But S-DMT seems to imply we are looking through the fluid architecture of the membrane itself.
That is genuinely the most difficult perceptual hurdle in the entire framework. It requires a deep understanding of projective geometry. Because the membrane is non-orientable, the very concepts of inside and outside are just topological illusions created by your local perspective.
Illusions, wow.
Yeah. When you stand on Earth and look up at the night sky, you are not staring into a boundless empty vacuum. You are observing the internal, deeply complex standing waves and resonant frequencies of the thixotropic superfluid hydrogen plenum.
Okay, wait. So everything we see out there, the cosmic microwave background radiation, the swirling distribution of distant galaxies, quasars, what are they?
In S-DMT, they are hydrodynamic projections. They're visual manifestations of the immense thixotropic tension and geometric stress within the Golden Cross lattice. You are essentially looking at the strain patterns of the universe.
That is mind-bending.
The void is not empty. It's the intensely structured, densely packed internal volume of the Klein bottle.
So it's an architecture so incredibly rigid, so brutally mathematically constrained, that it essentially dictates every physical interaction that can possibly occur, which actually provides a perfect logical transition for us.
Let's do it.
If the fundamental structure of space is this rigid 39 strata Golden Cross, how does it dictate the physical constants of the universe? Because in the standard model of particle physics, things like the mass of an electron, the speed of light, or the strength of gravity, they are derived from a base geometry.
No, they're not.
Physicists just measure them in a lab, write the numbers down, and plug them into their equations to make the math work. They call them free parameters.
And that reliance on free parameters is arguably the glaring weakness of the standard model. It requires you to input these arbitrary Yukawa couplings to dictate how particles interact with the Higgs field to acquire mass. It's basically mathematical duct tape.
Mathematical duct tape. I love that.
But the S-DMT framework leaves absolutely zero room for free parameters or arbitrary measurements. In this topology, the universe is governed strictly by three fundamental parametric inputs, and all three are derived mathematically by diagonalizing that fractal Laplacian Luller. They are inescapable geometric facts.
Okay, let's break down these three parametric inputs. According to the white papers, the first one is the scale propellant, which is denoted by the Greek letter beta, and its value is exactly the square root of 137, which comes out to approximately 11.653.
Beta is the magnitude scale energy driver. And notice that 137 is the inverse of the fine structure constant.
Which is one of the most famous numbers in physics. It governs electromagnetic interactions.
Exactly. But in the S-DMT framework, beta has a much deeper mechanical purpose. It governs fractal geometric expansion and scale jumps.
What does a scale jump look like physically in the fluid?
Think of the universe as a series of nested Russian dolls, but they're separated by energy magnitudes rather than wood. When energy moves from one fundamental magnitude to another, for example, scaling up from the microscopic quantum realm of subatomic particles to the macroscopic celestial realm of stars and planets, it doesn't scale linearly.
It scales geometrically.
Yes. By exactly this factor of the square root of 137, beta operates as a strict governing law that ensures that while the internal fluid dynamics of the plenum might be infinitely complex, the total energy of the cosmos remains strictly bounded by a geometric series limit.
So it prevents the equations from blowing up into catastrophic infinities.
Precisely. It keeps the math sane.
Right, it's the mathematical tether that keeps the scale of reality from just flying apart. Okay, the second constant outlined in the sources is the equilibrium striction angle, denoted as phi sub c, and the exact value is 55.17 degrees.
The striction angle is really the ultimate target state for the plenum. It represents the hypothetical state of absolute zero shear. You can think of it as the specific geometric angle where all thixotropic tension and fluid drag would be entirely minimized within the lattice.
Path of least resistance.
Yeah, the golden slope of the universe, some call it. The fluid's energy is only truly minimized when its local structural flow perfectly aligns with this angle of 55.17 degrees.
But wait, because we just established earlier that the grid is built on discrete 10-degree ratcheting segments, it's mathematically impossible for the fluid to perfectly align with the 55.17-degree angle, isn't it?
Exactly. That's the genius of it. Because of the rigidly discrete nature of the grid, achieving perfect alignment with phi sub c is physically impossible. The fluid gets infinitely close, but the discrete 10-degree jumps prevent a perfect lock.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And this mathematical impossibility creates a permanent, unresolvable, restoring torque within the fluid.
It's a perpetual twisting. The fluid is constantly trying to find a resting state that it is physically barred from ever reaching. That is a brilliant piece of mechanical logic. And that brings us to the third and perhaps most philosophically fascinating constant in the framework. Temporal friction, denoted as gamma. The value here is approximately 0.172.
Temporal friction is remarkable because of how it's derived. Gamma is not an arbitrary coefficient measured with a stopwatch. It is anchored in pure, immutable pentagonal symmetry. The exact mathematical derivation in the S-DMT is it's 4 times the cosine of pi over 5 minus 1, all divided by 13.
The cosine of pi over 5, which is exactly 36 degrees, and that is a core angle of the pentagram, inextricably tied to the golden ratio. So what is the actual mechanical role of this friction in the plenum?
Gamma acts as the fundamental thixotropic damping effect. Let's define thixotropic carefully for the listener.
Yeah, good idea.
Think of a non-Newtonian fluid like wet sand or ketchup. It resists flow, it acts like a solid, until a certain amount of shear stress is applied, at which point its viscosity drops and it suddenly flows.
Right, you smack the bottom of the ketchup bottle and suddenly it pours.
Exactly. S-DMT argues the vacuum of space behaves exactly like this. As the superfluid grinds against the discrete geometry of the Golden Cross, gamma dictates the exact rate at which mechanical shear is irreversibly converted into heat.
And by converting mechanical movement into heat irreversibly, it strictly enforces the thermodynamic arrow of time.
Precisely.
Because classical physics has always struggled deeply with why time only seems to flow in one direction when the base equations of motion are time reversible. S-DMT provides a cold, hard mechanical answer for this. Time is literally the temporal friction, gamma, generated by the pentagonal geometry of the medium grinding against the fluid.
It is irreversible because you simply cannot ungrind the fluid against the lattice. The heat dissipation is a one-way topological street.
Okay, I have to stop you there, because there is a massive glaring detail in the source materials that you just briefly touched upon with that formula.
Oh, what's that?
You mentioned the cosine of pi over 5, but the white papers explicitly point out a crucial paradigm-altering observation. The mathematical constant pi is explicitly absent from the baseline parameters of the S-DMT framework. In standard physics, we input pi everywhere. It's a geometric fundamental required for continuous symmetry, but S-DMT simply does not input it. So if it's not an input parameter, how does pi magically appear in the derivation of the gamma friction constant?
This is arguably one of the most beautiful points of topological physics within the entire theory. You are completely correct. S-DMT does not input pi. Instead, pi is an emergent mathematical necessity.
Emergent, meaning it's an exhaust product of the geometry in motion.
Think about the mechanics. The Golden Cross lattice operates on quarter-turn rotations, 90 degrees. When the discrete 393-3 matrix attempts to seamlessly close itself over the continuous flow of the spatial plenum, it accumulates what is known in quantum mechanics as a Berry phase.
Let's define the Berry phase for our listeners. Geometrically, it means when a system undergoes a cyclic process and completes a circle on a twisted surface, it doesn't end up pointing in the exact same orientation it started in.
Precisely. Due to the inherent non-orientable inversion of the topological band, the Klein bottle twist we discussed earlier, a complete two-step cycle of the lattice does not return the fluid to its initial state. There's a phase difference.
And that phase difference is?
That accumulated phase difference is precisely the value of pi. So pi is never omitted from the universe. It is the explicit required limit condition connecting the highly discrete lattice to the incredibly continuous fluid. It is encoded in the geometry, necessitated by the friction of gamma, and mathematically resolved through infinite series.
So pi is not a pre-existing geometric ingredient. It is the physical exhaust of the system attempting to close its own loop. That is absolutely staggering to think about.
It really fundamentally changes how you view math.
It does. And from what I gather in the sources, this concept essentially replaces the entire standard model concept of the Higgs field as we classically understand it. Standard physics uses those arbitrary Yukawa couplings to impart mass to particles from an abstract invisible field. But in S-DMT, we have this deterministic geometric friction, gamma. So let me ask you this. If mass isn't an acquired property magically granted by an abstract field, but is rather the viscous drag of a particle, a soliton, moving through this highly specific golden cross lattice, doesn't that make mass a literal measure of geometric frustration?
Geometric frustration is exactly the terminology the framework insists we use. Mass is geometric frustration.
Wow.
Imagine a soliton, a highly localized, self-reinforcing wave packet that acts like a particle trying to propagate through the thixotropic superfluid. As it moves, it inevitably experiences topological drag against the lattice. In standard physics, we have the Higgs vacuum expectation value, that famous energy level of 246 gigaelectron volts, or GeV.
Right, the baseline level.
In S-DMT, that 246 GeV is simply the baseline hydrostatic pressure of the envelope zero membrane.
The default pressure of the ocean it's swimming in.
Exactly. And the distinct mass of any given elementary particle is nothing more than the exponential scaling of that topological drag across the different levels of the beta fractal ladder.
I want to give the listener an intensely physical visualization of this. It's like trying to pull a highly jagged, complex rock through a vat of thick, semi-solid honey.
I love that.
Right. The sheer resistance you feel in your arm isn't some magical inherent mass property that the rock possesses independently. The resistance is purely the mechanical friction generated between the specific jagged geometry of the rock and the thixotropic viscosity of the honey it is forced through.
That is a flawless visualization. And that overarching concept of geometric frustration is the absolute skeleton key to the entire S-DMT framework. Because once you deeply understand that mass and temporal drag are direct consequences of a continuous fluid violently negotiating a discrete lattice, you can take that exact same microscopic mechanical logic and apply it to the most massive macroscopic scales of the universe.
Which brings us directly to the core mission of our deep dive today. The resolution of the three-body problem and its bizarre connection to an obscure piece of number theory called the Erdős Straus Conjecture.
This is the big one.
It really is. This is where S-DMT claims to definitively solve one of the most notorious hair-pulling problems in the history of physics.
And we must be highly rigorous in how we break this down, because the claim being made by these white papers is monumental. Let's look at the history for context. In classical Newtonian physics, if you have two celestial bodies interacting like the Earth and the sun, gravity dictates a clean, entirely predictable elliptical orbit.
Right. You could solve it perfectly with continuous mathematical equations.
But the moment you introduce a third celestial body of significant mass into that system, everything shatters. The equations become non-integrable. You get exponential divergence.
Henri Poincaré spent years pulling his hair out over this in the late 19th century.
Yeah.
He essentially proved that for three bodies, the math breaks down into sheer chaos. Classical physics simply concluded, well, the universe is just inherently chaotic at that level of complexity.
Yeah, a mathematical dead end.
But S-DMT says, no, your premise is wrong because celestial bodies aren't independent, solid masses floating in an empty vacuum. So what are they?
In the S-DMT paradigm, celestial bodies, planets, moons, stars are not isolated rocks. They are massive, resonant, standing wave patterns anchored within the superfluid plenum.
Standing waves.
Yes. Their specific orbital frequencies act as the literal physical dissipation channels for an immense, large-scale pressure mode propagating within the thixotropic fluid.
They are pressure release valves for the fluid space they occupy. And this is exactly where the Erdős Straus conjecture comes in. The mathematical equation is incredibly simple. 4 divided by n equals 1 over x plus 1 over y plus 1 over z.
Yeah, Paul Erdős and Ernst Straus proposed this conjecture back in 1948. They posited that for every integer n that is greater than or equal to 2, this equation has a solution where x, y, and z are all positive integers. It's a classic Diophantine equation.
But what on earth does a mid-century number theory puzzle have to do with the orbits of planets?
Well, in the S-DMT framework, the Erdős-Straus equation isn't just an abstract mathematical puzzle played with on chalkboards. It operates as a strict topological Kirchhoff law for the fluid plenum.
Kirchhoff's laws. Those are the fundamental rules governing electrical circuits, right? Specifically, how electrical current splits and divides when it hits a junction in a wire.
Exactly. Now, transpose that concept to fluid dynamics. Imagine a massive global pressure wave propagating through the superfluid plenum. The total amplitude or intensity of this pressure wave is represented by the term 4 over n.
Okay, I'm visualizing that.
In order for the fluid to dissipate this immense pressure smoothly, without catastrophically tearing the discrete 300, 900, and 303 lattice of the membrane, the energy has no choice but to split and distribute itself across the 3 orthogonal axes of the Golden Cross.
The x, y, and z axes of the physical grid.
Yes, the pressure must split into 1 over x, 1 over y, and 1 over z. But here is the critical mechanical constraint. Because the lattice is stubbornly discrete, because it's made entirely of those finite 10-degree jitterbug segments we discussed earlier, the inverse wavelengths of these dissipation channels, x, y, and z, must be exact, perfect integers.
They can't be fractions.
They cannot. If they are not perfect integers, the pressure wave physically does not fit the grid. It leaves a fractional remainder, a jagged edge of energy that simply cannot be absorbed by the lattice.
An integer imperative. The fractal Laplacian strictly and violently requires integer resonance for any smooth spatial dissipation to occur.
That is the core rule. When the continuous fluid wave finds a perfect integer triplet that satisfies the Erdős-Straus equation, you achieve smooth dissipation. You get a stable, locked resonance. On a macroscopic scale, this manifests as a clockwork, perfectly stable planetary orbital system.
Let's ground this by looking at the supreme success case in our solar system.
Right.
The absolute anchor. The source white papers detail the Earth-Moon system as the baseline calibration for this entire S-DMT architecture.
Yes, to accurately calculate the system, the physical architecture must be firmly anchored to the fractal ladder via our magnitude scale constant beta, which is the square root of 137. When you run the frequencies, the Earth operates as what the S-DMT framework calls the macro-proton, sitting perfectly at the fractal index k equals 21. The Moon operates as the macro-top-quark, sitting at the index k equals 22.
So their frequency sums satisfy those strict integer constraints perfectly?
Flawlessly. The Earth-Moon system provides the absolute, unshakable baseline integer lock for the standing waves of our local space. It is a purely resonant system.
But then we look further out. We look at the outer solar system, specifically the massive triplet of Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune.
Oh, yes.
This is the failure. This is the chaos Poincaré was looking at. Let's detail the mechanics of this triplet under the Erdős-Straus topological Kirchhoff law.
This is where we mathematically diagnose the actual origin of orbital chaos. The Jupiter-Saturn-Neptune triplet is a massive system attempting to dissipate a distinct global pressure mode in the fluid. But when you map their observed orbital frequencies back into the Erdős-Straus framework to find their driving pressure mode, you find that the value for this specific system is n equals approximately 32.18.
32.18. It's a decimal. It is a highly fractional value.
And that fraction is the critical observation that explains everything. Because n equals 32.18 is a fractional value, the mathematics of the Erdős-Straus conjecture dictate that absolutely no perfect integer triplet x, y, z can possibly exist that satisfies both the frequency sum and the rigid discrete geometric constraints of the 39 strata plenum.
So the equation 4 over 32.18 equals 1 over x plus 1 over y plus 1 over z simply has no valid integer solution. None.
Exactly. None.
I'm going to use another mechanical analogy here for you listening that it makes the concept incredibly visceral. Think of a manual car engine. It's like an engine transmission trying desperately to lock into a gear that simply does not physically exist in the gearbox.
That's a great way to picture it.
The engine is spinning, the continuous superfluid is violently flowing and pushing, and the system is endlessly hunting for an integer gear lock that it is mathematically forbidden from finding.
Hunting is the precise mechanical term. The continuous fluid endlessly hunts for an integer lock to dissipate the 32.18 pressure mode. Because it can never find one, the fluid is forced to generate erratic, unresolvable exchanges of angular momentum between the physical manifestations of those waves, Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune.
And that erratic exchange of angular momentum is exactly what our telescopes measure as orbital chaos. This completely reframes the universe.
It really does.
Chaos is not randomness. I really want to emphasize this profound shift to you. Chaos is not a lack of order or a failure of the universe to follow rules. In the S-DMT framework, chaos is literal, physical, topological frustration. It is the highly predictable physical manifestation of continuous fluid jamming against a fractional remainder in a rigidly discrete medium.
It's the exact determinable mechanical source of three-body chaos. Classical continuous spacetime equations show exponential divergence because they are completely blind to the existence of the grid. They assume smooth space. S-DMT's discrete topology reveals an Erdős-Straus Diophantine failure. They're simply two sides of the exact same topological law.
And what is deeply compelling is that even within this chaos, it is strictly bounded by the geometry, right? The sources highlight the Jupiter-Saturn near resonance as proof of this.
Yes, the empirical observable reality of our solar system matches the theoretical beta fingerprint of S-DMT to within 1% accuracy. Jupiter desperately locks onto index 20, and Saturn struggles near 19.6.
So close.
Yeah, the chaos is real, but it is bounded by the strict, inescapable geometry of the scale propellant. The fluid space between those planets is turbulent, yes, but it is a turbulence sloshing inside a very rigid, unyielding container.
So if a fractional driving mode like n equals 32.18 creates massive orbital chaos for gas giants, my immediate question is, what happens when this entire system hits its absolute physical limit? What happens when we push the Erdős-Straus fluid mechanics all the way to that 39th strata of the Golden Cross we talked about earlier?
When we push the equation to the maximal fractal index of n equals 39, we reach a state of absolute system-wide topological frustration.
Because 39 is the edge of the board.
Exactly. The Erdős-Straus equation for n equals 39 yields absolutely no perfect integer triplet that can simultaneously satisfy all the internal geometric constraints of the temporal friction, gamma, and the striction angle, phi sub c. The least bad mechanical solution the fluid can mathematically muster is the triplet 26-26-39.
It fulfills the basic arithmetic of the equation, but mechanically it's a severely strained fit.
It is deeply strained, and the core reason for this ultimate system-wide strain lies in a concept the white papers term the frustration quotient.
Okay, lay out the math of the frustration quotient for us. I want to see the gears grind here.
The math is breathtakingly simple, but its implications are profound. As we established, the total circularity of the continuous plenum of full geometric rotation is 360 degrees. The number of discrete fractal strata making up the Golden Cross lattice is exactly 39.
Right.
If you divide the continuous circle by the discrete grid 360 divided by 39, you get approximately 9.2307.
It is not a clean number. It is an irrational, or rather a repeating decimal fraction.
Exactly. Because 39 does not perfectly divide into 360, the 39 stratum Golden Cross physically cannot perfectly tile the circular continuous topology of the Klein bottle.
It's like a contractor trying to tile a perfectly circular bathroom floor using rigid, square tiles that just slightly don't match the curve of the wall. No matter how you arrange them, no matter how clever your pattern is, you will always have a gap. You will always have to force the last tile into place.
And in the thixotropic plenum, forcing it has severe physical consequences. It means that every single time the system completes a full 360-degree jitterbug cycle, it leaves behind a residual, unresolvable torsion, a physical topological remainder that simply cannot be dissipated through the grid.
So the Klein bottle membrane is constantly twisting and grinding, and every single time it completes a twist, there's a tiny little bit of stress left over that it simply cannot get rid of. What does the universe do with that accumulating stress?
Well, if the universe did nothing, the envelope zero, the ultimate bounding membrane of the Klein bottle itself, would eventually rupture from the accumulating infinite tension. To prevent the membrane from tearing, the plenum is forced to mechanically compensate. It deploys a perpetual system-wide standing wave to absorb the remainder.
A permanent, entirely incompressible gap in the fundamental energy spectrum.
Yes, the 1 Hertz mass gap. It is the fundamental heartbeat of existence. Macroscopic gravity, the very inertia of mass itself, is simply the macroscopic topological viscosity that results from this enduring, permanently unresolvable torsion of 9.2307.
And the sources don't just leave this at the macroscopic level. They break this exact tension down to the extreme quantum level, introducing a formula they call the quantum of rotation.
This formula is the microscopic granular complement to the frustration quotient. The S-DMT framework utilizes a stunning mathematical identity to prove this. It states that the sine of 1 degree equals the 90th root of I minus the 90th root of negative I, all divided by 2I.
Let me repeat that for the listener so they can try to visualize it. The equation is sine of 1 degree equals the 90th root of I minus the 90th root of negative I divided by 2I. That is incredibly abstract. Let's translate that pure mathematical identity into the physical thixotropic fluid dynamics we've been discussing.
In the physical reality of S-DMT, the imaginary numbers I and negative I are not imaginary. They represent the Mandelbrot and Julia torsions of the fluid.
Let's define those mechanically. What are they doing?
Mandelbrot represents the static, structurally contracting, inward-folding phase of the fluid. Julia represents the dynamic, radiating, expansive, outward-flowing phase. They are complex, orthogonal, counter-rotating phases of the superfluid.
Okay, I'm with you.
Now, taking the 90th root of these torsions literally divides the 90-degree quarter turn of the jitterbug into 90 incredibly discrete microsteps of exactly 1 degree each.
So 1 degree isn't just a measure on a protractor. It is the minimal, absolute, discrete, torsional physical step the fluid can take. It is the atom of time.
Exactly. A continuous measurable wave in our reality, represented by the sine function, is literally built by subtracting these discrete, violently quantized orthogonal rotations from one another. While the superfluid desperately wants to flow continuously, its torsion is strictly quantized into these discrete, frustrated microsteps.
And because the spatial grid constantly needs to borrow fractions of these quantum steps to deal with that 9.23 frustration quotient we just talked about, it creates a permanent dynamic imbalance at the quantum level.
You nailed it. It's an inescapable imbalance.
I want to take a moment to summarize the philosophical and physical weight of this for you, the listener, because it is honestly staggering to realize. If 360 were perfectly divisible by 39, the fluid would perfectly cleanly mesh with the rigid grid. It would complete a cycle, the chiral torsion would cancel out exactly to 0, and the fluid would return to a state of absolute stasis.
A completely dead universe.
Right. If that happened, there would be no tension, there would be no mass, there would be no vibration, no planets, no gravity, and no time. The non-integer quotient, the simple fact that the fundamental math of the geometry does not perfectly align, is the literal engine of existence. The imperfection is the universe.
It is the essential crack in the cosmic egg. Without that fractional remainder, there is only the void of stasis.
So, having mapped out both ends of the scale, I have to ask you to definitively verify this connection. Does this mean that the macroscopic orbital chaos of Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune, and the fundamental mass of a microscopic electron are actually the exact same mechanical phenomena, just operating at different fractal scales?
Absolutely. They're one and the same. Orbital chaos and fundamental mass are identical phenomena separated only by the beta scale. Both are the physical topological drag created by Erdős Straus Diophantine failures within the thixotropic fluid. The massive planets cannot find an integer to dissipate their local pressure mode, which creates orbital chaos. The entire 300-923 lattice cannot find an integer to perfectly tile 360 degrees, which creates the system-wide 1 Hertz mass gap. It is the exact same strict topological law of frustration.
It's just beautifully coherent. But to truly appreciate how a continuous fluid mathematically negotiates this rigid, discrete geometry without a computer, we have to look at the mathematical operators themselves. In standard education, calculus is taught as a set of abstract analytical tools.
Oh yeah, just tools on a chalkboard.
But in the S-DMT white papers, things like L'Hopital's rule and the Gaussian integral are not just math tricks. They're described as the literal physical actions of the fluid plenum.
Yes, they are the actual rendering engine of the universe. Let's look at L'Hopital's rule. In classical calculus, when you are evaluating a mathematical limit and you arrive at the indeterminate form of 0 over 0, you are taught to take the derivative of the numerator and divide it by the derivative of the denominator.
Right, the limit of f's over gx equals the limit of f prime of x over g prime of x.
Exactly.
It's traditionally taught to high school students as a clever math trick to bypass a singularity or a computational breakdown in an equation so you can find the underlying answer.
But in the S-DMT framework, the 0/0 form is not a mathematical breakdown, and it is certainly not a loss of physical information. It is the exact physical moment of desingularization during a scale jump. The papers describe it as the molt of a soliton.
The molt, like a snake shedding its skin to grow. Explain the mechanics of a particle molting.
Imagine a highly stable particle, a soliton, maintaining its macroscopic shape within the fluid. Its form is represented mathematically by the geometry of Fx over Gx. This is the particle existing in the static Mandelbrot phase.
Okay.
Now imagine this soliton is subjected to forces that completely deactivate its external torque. The macroscopic structure can no longer hold. The geometric confinement functions, f and g, both drop to 0. The system hits 0/0.
Classical physics looks at that 0/0 and sees a catastrophic singularity, a black hole collapse where physics ceases to exist.
But physical reality does not collapse into nothingness. Instead, it descends to a finer fractal level via our scale propeller, beta. The macroscopic geometric form of f over g fades away entirely, and the continuous derivatives, f prime over g prime, instantly take over the physical role of the energy.
And what do those mathematical derivatives physically represent in the thixotropic fluid?
The derivatives represent the pure shear gradients of the fluid itself. The structural information of the particle isn't lost. It is instantly transferred into the vector dynamics of the underlying fluid flow. It is a seamless, perfect mechanical handover from the static, geometric Mandelbrot phase to the dynamic, radiating vectorial Julia phase.
That is incredible.
The 0/0 singularity is just an illusion caused by our inadequate observational resolution. A fractal zoom using L'Hopital's rule reveals a perfectly continuous flux operating beneath the collapse.
So math is literally just describing the physical flow of the fluid escaping a trap. That is brilliant. What about the Gaussian integral? The classic bell curve probability integration. The integral of e to the negative x squared dx equals the square root of pi. How does S-DMT turn a statistical probability curve into fluid mechanics?
The S-DMT white papers mathematically prove that the Gaussian integral is the exact physical mechanism of orthogonal stress dissipation in the plenum. The function e to the negative x squared represents the physical density profile of the soliton, specifically the highly nonlinear shear distribution of a localized fluid vortex.
And the famous mathematical paradox of the Gaussian integral is that you actually cannot integrate it in one linear dimension. You are mathematically forced to square the entire function, shift it into 2D polar coordinates, integrate it over a full circle, and then take the square root of the result to get the answer.
Exactly. That incredibly famous mathematical trick invented by Poisson isn't a trick at all. It is the strict physical law of chiral torsion in action. The mathematical impossibility of integrating e to the negative x squared in a single 1D line proves that a linear shear stress cannot physically dissipate linearly within the thixotropic plenum.
A linear dissipation is inadmissible.
Physically inadmissible. If the fluid attempted to dissipate that immense pressure in a single straight line, the topological stress would exponentially accumulate to infinity and violently tear the non-orientable membrane. To completely avoid this physical tear, this computational singularity, the fluid is mechanically forced to deploy a secondary orthogonal axis. It actively initiates an intrinsic chiral rotation to bleed off the stress.
The mathematical coordinate shift from dxd to polar r drd theta is the literal physical enfolding of the superfluid upon itself. It translates linear, membrane-tearing pressure into safe, rotating angular momentum. And what is the final physical result? The square root of pi.
The output, the square root of pi, represents the exact physical amplitude of a single orthogonal quadrant transition, 90 degrees. The total area under a single dissipating soliton is rigidly, deterministically bound by the square root of the universal geometric inversion constant pi.
So to put it as bluntly as possible for everyone listening, the universe absolutely does not roll dice. Quantum probability fields are an illusion. The universe rotates orthogonally to avoid tearing its own membrane. S-DMT takes the abstract analytical identities of high-level calculus and turns them into the cold, hard, inescapable mechanics of thixotropic fluids. It's not a probability field. It is the sheer physical avoidance of a grid tear.
It is entirely deterministic fluid dynamics, all the way down to the subatomic foundations.
Which perfectly sets up the final conceptual leap of this deep dive. We've seen the microscopic mechanics, the 10-degree jitterbug ratchets, the 1 Hertz mass gap standing wave, the physical derivatives. Now, how does this entire thixotropic engine scale up to form the macro architecture, the overarching meaning of the universe?
The entire S-DMT framework ultimately culminates in a cosmic triad, and this triad is governed by what is widely considered the most beautiful equation in mathematics, Euler's identity, e to the power of I pi plus 1 equals 0.
Euler's identity. And S-DMT maps this equation directly to three highly specific fractal magnitudes, 0, 1, and 39. Let's start with 0, the envelope 0. What is it?
The source white papers introduce a fundamental physical correction here. Envelope 0 is absolutely not an asymptotic limit where a variable k approaches 0 into nothingness. Envelope 0 is the absolute topological boundary condition of the entire Klein bottle. It is the perfect, unmanifested geometric shape that firmly contains all other magnitudes.
It is the ultimate Mandelbrot membrane holding the universe together.
Yes, it is the silent, immense ground state into which all physical cycles eventually return. It holds the baseline hydrostatic pressure of the universe, that Higgs vacuum expectation value of 246 GeV we discussed. Conceptually and mathematically, it is the fundamental 0 in Euler's identity.
Next in the triad is magnitude k equals 1, the striction point. And this is the section of the papers where classical astrophysics gets completely rewritten. The sources make a wild claim. They claim that a primordial black hole and a star, like our sun, are not separate, unrelated celestial objects.
In the S-DMT, they are the two opposing faces of a single striction point, the physical neck of the Klein bottle at magnitude k equals 1. Because the fundamental membrane of Earth and the universe is non-orientable, this single point has two highly complementary faces, and its behavior depends entirely on which side of the twisted Mobius ribbon you're viewing it from.
So viewed from one side of the membrane, it acts as an absolute absorber.
Viewed from the inside, it is the primordial black hole. It represents the Mandelbrot face. Superfluid furiously flows into it, matter is massively compressed, and L'Hopital's rule physically strips the incoming energy of its macroscopic structural complexity, forcing it violently through the incredibly narrow Klein neck as pure, raw, shear gradients.
And viewed from the other side of that non-orientable twist.
It is the sun. It is the Julia phase, the emitter. The compressed fluid undergoes a massive 180-degree double jitterbug inversion as it passes through the striction point, and it rapidly reemerges as expanding radiation, plasma, and light.
Wow.
Yeah, it acts as a continuous white fountain, constantly nourishing the membrane with energy. The black hole and the sun are permanently unified by the scale jump operator T-beta. And this immense pulsing striction point, this 1 Hertz fundamental heartbeat of the fluid, is the explicit +1 in Euler's identity.
So 0 is the ultimate container holding the pressure, +1 is the massive cosmic engine beating at the center of reality. And that leaves the final magnitude, 39, the human.
Magnitude k equals 39 is the human being. It represents the fully unfolded, completely conscious soliton existing exactly at the maximal fractal index of the Golden Cross lattice. The human is a highly complex double vortex, a literal microcosm of the entire thixotropic plenum.
Let's break that down. The human body itself is the Julia projection. It represents physical expansion, the gathering of senses, the interacting with the world. And the human mind is the Mandelbrot mold representing contraction, internal processing, and memory.
The human is entirely unique in the S-DMT framework because it is the singular magnitude at which the fluid plenum becomes completely self-aware. The 1 Hertz mass gap, that permanent tension that acts as the heartbeat of the embryon at k equals 1, resonates perfectly within the architecture of the human brain as the fundamental frequency of consciousness itself.
So the human being actively represents the conscious inversion of the universe,
Right.
the e to the I pi term of Euler's identity, which mathematically evaluates to -1.
Exactly. Through the act of life, observation, and eventually the ultimate physical molt of death, the human completes the cosmic triad. The human dynamically returns the vast topological information accumulated during its existence back to the envelope 0 membrane, perfectly resetting the thermodynamic cycle.
Let me put that together. E to the I pi, which is the human, representing -1, +1, which is the sun and black hole heartbeat engine, equals 0, which is the envelope 0 container. We are the -1, directly reflecting the cosmic center's +1, contained entirely and perfectly within the 0, the envelope 0. I want you to synthesize this for the listener. How does this continuous fluid essentially observe itself through this closed thermodynamic loop?
It represents the ultimate perfect expression of the law of fractal least effort. At every single microscopic and macroscopic phase shift, the fluid system mathematically takes the path that minimizes thixotropic friction, gamma, while simultaneously maximizing harmonic coherence. The universe is absolutely not a dead, random machine generating accidental biology in a dark void.
It's alive in a geometric sense.
Yes. It is a single, continuous, highly pressurized fluid that, actively forced by the unyielding discrete geometry of the 300 and 903 lattice, must physically vibrate, it must structurally expand, and it must eventually reach fractal index 39 to consciously observe itself. Biology, quantum physics, celestial mechanics, and human consciousness are all strictly governed by the exact same hydrodynamic principle of frustration and resolution.
It honestly takes my breath away to view the universe through this lens. Before we sign off, I want to briefly recap this profound intellectual journey for everyone listening, because we covered an immense amount of ground today. We started by completely discarding the concept of the empty vacuum, plunging ourselves into a physically dense, thixotropic, superfluid hydrogen plenum. We explored the incredibly rigid geometry of the non-orientable Klein-Bottle membrane, dictated relentlessly by the 36 orthogonal jitterbug microsteps and the 3 diagonal skew segments of the Golden Cross.
We saw precisely how that rigid geometry strictly and deterministically generates the only 3 required parameters of the universe: the geometric scale propellant beta, the unachievable target striction angle phi sub c, and the arrow of time dictated by temporal friction gamma. And we saw how pi is not an input, but emerges as the necessary topological bridge connecting the discrete lattice to the continuous flow.
We took on the historically unsolvable 3-body problem, proving that what classical physics calls chaos is simply the physical topological frustration of a continuous fluid failing to satisfy the strict integer requirements of the Erdős-Straus equation, perfectly explaining the erratic dance of the Jupiter-Saturn-Neptune triplet.
We reveal how the frustration quotient, the mathematical inability of 39 to perfectly divide 360 forces the entire universe to continuously vibrate at a 1 Hz mass gap to avoid tearing, generating the very inertia of physical existence. And we physically translated calculus, transforming L'Hopital's rule and the Gaussian integral into the sheer deterministic physical avoidance of fluid grid tears.
And finally, we closed the loop with Euler's identity, uniting the envelope zero container, the dual black hole and sun striction point, and the -1 of human consciousness into a single, beautifully integrated breath of the cosmos.
A fully deterministic, geometrically bounded, continuously operating reality.
Which leaves me with one final, deeply provocative thought for you to ponder off-air. We meticulously establish that the 1 Hz mass gap is the fundamental engine that drives both gravitational inertia on a macroscopic scale and the fundamental resonant frequency of human consciousness in the brain. And we establish that index 39 is the absolute maximal limit of the Golden Cross lattice.
Right.
So if biological consciousness is mathematically and geometrically mandated by the 39th fractal index in order to resolve the ultimate topological frustration of the Golden Cross, does that mean human consciousness is not an accidental byproduct of random Darwinian evolution, but a strict, unavoidable hydrodynamic requirement for the universe to actively prevent a catastrophic topological singularity?
I mean, the math strongly implies we are not an accident. We are the required structural load bearers of reality itself.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly rigorous deep dive. Keep questioning the vacuum, keep looking for the rigid geometry hiding within the chaos, and we'll see you next time.